Hello and welcome to the 8th video lecture for English 421Y, Technical Writing Online. In this lecture, I will focus on several important logistical decisions that you will need to make prior to beginning your user research for Unit 3. You can watch this video. I would recommend watching this video either as you are developing your testing plan or after you've already developed your testing plan and received feedback from me and are beginning to think, how do I start this process? Steve Krug's Don't Make Me Think, which I've asked you to read, is considered one of the best resources available on do-it-yourself usability testing, or testing specifically intended to be used by companies that cannot afford a large-scale testing operation or to hire professional testers, paid participants, etc. This philosophy, which he calls lost our lease going out of business style usability testing, emphasizes low-cost, minimal resource testing that can theoretically be applied by any company and any product. For instance, the table on page 144 here identifies the following differences between Krug's lost our lease testing and traditional testing. Lost our lease testing has fewer participants, more informal recruitment of participants, little advanced planning or preparation, and low costs. Krug also notices that with traditional testing, a long written report is usually made, whereas with lost or lease testing, the report is usually shorter. It might be notes or maybe a summary memo or something along those lines. In the rest of this chapter, Krug identifies the key elements of testing and adapts different aspects of testing to fit the lost our lease minimalist approach. So he talks about how many users you should recruit. He talks about where to test, who should do the testing, who should facilitate the testing, what do you do when testing is done. He talks through different aspects of what to look for. This is based on web design. And then in chapter 10, talks about how to be the facilitator, what to do, what not to do. And he walks through a really nice example of a testing session. Talks about what to do if you're observing, gives you things to look for. This is very, very useful, especially if you've never done any kind of participant research before and you want to get a sense of kind of what to expect. And then finally, chapter 11 is about interpreting results, using results to actually solve problems and improve your document. In the remainder of this lecture, I want to walk through 10 key questions and best practices for usability that I present in the PowerPoint presentation. These questions are loosely based off of some of the things that Krug brings up, but they're also things that I've noticed that students struggle with in the past. So the first thing that I want to talk about is identifying and recruiting participants. This is perhaps the most important part of the whole process. Without participants, user research is impossible. So the first step is to figure out who to recruit and then how you're going to actually recruit them. Participants for this project should be one of the primary or secondary audiences that you identify in your original scenario back in Unit 2. Since you need 3 participants for this project, you may want to recruit all the same type of participant, all different, or some combination. For instance, if you are testing a document that will be used in a chemistry lab at Purdue, you might recruit a student from a current chemistry class, a student from a former chemistry class, and the current TA for that class. I've asked you to recruit 3 participants, but as Krug notes in a visual map on page 147 of Don't Make Me Think, here, 2 rounds of testing with fewer participants in a revised version of the document is often more effective than one round of testing with more participants. So here you have one test with 8 users that identifies 5 problems. Here you have 2 tests with 3 users. The first test identifies 3 problems. The second test identifies 6 problems for a total of 9 problems. Obviously, it's not always that simple, but the point is the more testing you do with different kinds of participants, the more likely you are to notice things. Tons of participants don't necessarily equal better results. So you also need to determine the best way to recruit potential participants. I'm asking everyone to write a recruitment email, as this is the standard for most formal research. But it's possible that you will recruit in person, via social media or text, through an announcement made in person, or by phone. Last semester, I even had a student make a flyer and post it on his dorm floor, and people responded to it. There's no right or wrong way to recruit, but there are better and worse ways depending on your situation. For instance, if you don't have a familiar relationship with someone outside of work, then it might be rude or creepy to call them if you have their number. An email is formal and gives them an easy out if they would prefer not to participate. Similarly, in-person recruiting can work really well one-on-one or as an announcement to a large group. But if you don't already know the people you're recruiting, then one-on-one could be awkward, and an announcement to a huge 200-person lecture hall might just be ignored. Use your best judgment, use your network, and try something else if you don't get a response after a few days. Second, you need to select a research method. As Graves and Graves note, the first step to planning your research is to decide what it is you want your users to be able to do after working through your draft. For our purposes, this means deciding what method or methods you're going to use to collect data. I've been generally referring to this project as usability testing, but the truth is that not everyone will actually be able to test their documents. Testing, in this case, requires users to interact with the document in a realistic setting and use it as they would in a real situation. Understandably, testing is not possible if you cannot recruit participants with the requisite skills and knowledge, you cannot acquire the equipment, materials, or resources needed for actual testing, you can't access the physical space necessary to properly conduct the testing, and you cannot get permission by an authority to use their intellectual property or their space. In such cases where you simply cannot have users actually test the document as it would be used in a real setting, you can still observe participants as they read and respond to the document, and then interview them about their thoughts, reactions, and suggestions. As a note, in some cases, a survey might also be used in usability testing, but I don't want you to use surveys for our purposes. If you are testing, it's important that you have tasks and goals. This is slide 17, talks a little bit more about this. Have these ready ahead of time so that participants have something to do during the test. I break down the difference between tasks and goals. If you aren't testing, but rather you're just kind of observing and interviewing, then you should split the session between observing their thoughts and reactions and asking specific questions that you prepare out loud ahead of time. So I break it down here between hypotheticals, having them use speak aloud protocol, and then using clarifying questions. The third thing that you need to decide is a location, a date, and a duration. After you figure out who your participants are, you need to decide where you're going to conduct research. You have 2 rough choices, in person or online. If you decide to conduct research online, I would like you to use video conferencing programs like Skype or WebEx, which is available in the ITAP labs on campus, as well as screen recording software like Camtasia, Screencast-O-Matic, or Adobe Captivate, so that you can access recordings of these sessions later on. If you do in-person research, which is honestly what I would recommend everyone does, unless your participants simply, you cannot get access to them in person, then you must select an appropriate location. In my experience, the best site is a neutral, public location where the participant will feel comfortable and that is quiet and affords some privacy. For example, reserving a private study room in the HISI or Hicks libraries would be perfect, as would grabbing a set of chairs in a residence hall lounge or using your company's conference room or employee break room. Less ideal would be a loud coffee shop, a busy public place like the Union, or your bedroom. Make sure you take your participants' needs and feelings into account and ask their preferences rather than going with what is most convenient for you. And seriously, don't use your bedroom or house. That's just awkward. Finally, select a date that works best for you, and then determine how long your session will be. Remember, your participant is helping you, so you need to respect their time. I recommend sessions between 20 and 60 minutes long. If you find your sessions are running shorter than 20 minutes, it means you either don't have enough for participants to do, you aren't asking enough questions, or you're rushing the participant to get done quickly. If you find your sessions are consistently longer than 60 minutes, it likely means your tasks are too complicated, you're trying to fit too much into each session, and you need to scale back what you're doing. While it's good to be comprehensive, it's also important to be respectful of your participants' time. If they are fine with going a bit longer, that's great, but give them a break to use the restroom or stretch. Don't be a taskmaster and force someone to sit down for 2 hours and test. That's not ethical. Most importantly, stick to the duration that you agreed upon at the beginning of your session. If you say, we're going to do 30 minutes, is that okay? And they say, well, actually, I need to leave in 10, you need to negotiate. I've noticed that students routinely underestimate how much time a test will take and end up going over, at least during the pilot session. But I always recommend estimating longer than you think you'll need. If you think there's no way it will take you more than 20 minutes, still say 30 minutes. It's better to say it's going to take 60 minutes and then only go for 40, and then to say it's going to take 10 minutes and then go for 40. Always err on the side of caution and estimate more time than you think you'll actually need. If you end up finishing early, woohoo, you're done early. That's great. If you end up going late, that can interfere with someone's schedule. Fourth, obtain and test appropriate equipment. You need to record your sessions, either through notes, through video, through audio, or screencast. No matter what kind of research you're doing, there's certain equipment that everyone will need. A computer or a paper version of your document, a camera or smartphone, and a piece of paper and a pen to take notes. Optional equipment that will result in better experiences include a tripod, an audio recorder, a screen recording program, and a microphone. All of those will produce higher quality recordings that you can then access later on easier. You are not required to purchase any equipment for the purpose of this class, but it might be worth it to ask a friend to borrow their microphone or tripod for a couple of days. After you have all of your equipment, it's super, super important that you test your setup that you will use in a similar environment. I cannot overemphasize how frustrating it is to find out that your mic doesn't work after you conduct an hour-long test. That's not fun at all. Similarly, you might think that Starbucks is not that loud, but if you test your audio recorder there and listen to the file and find out you can't hear anything, that tells you if it really is enough background noise or too much background noise. Test your setup, look and listen to the footage, look at the recordings that you make between sessions, make sure that they work the way that you want them to. Fifth, duplicate your recording methods. To ensure quality and accuracy of data, use at least 2 methods of recording during your research sessions. For instance, use an audio recorder and take notes. Use a screen recorder and then jot down notes and timestamps so you know where in the video to go back and look at footage. Set up a camera on a tripod, but then also use a redundant microphone to get better audio. These are all ways to use redundancy in recording in order to compare and contrast multiple ways of recording and make sure that you always have a backup. One of the just general rules about using technology in research is that if it can fail, it probably will. Have backup methods. If you don't want to spend extra money or you can't get access to an audio recorder or an actual camera, use your phone, but also take notes. If you don't take notes and you only use your phone, but then you find out that you didn't have enough space on your phone, you don't have any evidence. And that evidence means that you can't produce data that will then support your claims later on. Finally, I want to end this lecture by talking briefly about the short report that you will be developing. Your report should be 3 to 4 single-spaced pages and must contain the following 4 and an optional section: the introduction, methods, results, discussions, and appendices. In the introduction section, you should describe the document you have selected, including the audience, context, and purpose. You should explain how you recruited participants. That is, did you do it in person? Did you do it by email? Did you go to a lecture hall? You need to identify your participants, but don't use their real names for privacy and to make sure that you can report what they say without potentially getting them in trouble. Use pseudonyms, fake names, or numbers. Participant 1, or call them Bob, even if though that's not their real name. And then finally, describe the logistics of your research session: when, where, for how long, etc. In the methods section, you should identify the type of research, testing, observational research, interviews, the methods that you used, interviews, etc. What you did as a facilitator. Describe the recording methods that you used: notes, video, audio, screen capture, etc. And provide any other information about how you conducted the test and recorded the data. The point of a methods section is not just to say, here's what I did, but it's so that anyone who wanted to perhaps replicate your test could do so. They could do it in the same place, using the same methods, and that kind of thing. Replication is really important in qualitative research because it allows, and in quantitative research, because it allows someone to say, okay, this is how this person got their results. I'm going to do the exact same thing and see if I get the same results. The results section, you should describe what actually happened during each of your research sessions and identify the important findings from your research. That is, what stands out as interesting, surprising, or illuminating. Here you are not only describing what happened and you're framing that information based on actual data. You are not yet making recommendations or drawing conclusions. The results section needs to stand out as the evidence, and then the discussion section, which I'll describe next, is then the implications. So the discussion section presents the implications of your research, describes why these results are important, and provides specific recommendations for improving the document based on the evidence described in your results section. In addition, this is the section where you can identify any limitations of your research. Limitations are very important to research because all studies have flaws and problems, but it is your ethical responsibility as a researcher to clearly and accurately describe what they are and how they might impact your results. For instance, if all of your participants are really good friends and housemates of yours, they might be biased. Or if you were only able to interview expert participants and not novice users, that's something that you need to explain. There are any number of limitations. Those don't necessarily need to be things that were errors or mistakes. They can just be things that someone might call you out on. If you admit to them yourself, it allows people to say, okay, well, this is the data that this person got. Here are the things that might make it not generalizable to every situation. Finally, the appendix section is optional, but should include any and all materials that you used during the research sessions. This might include a script or agenda, a list of prompts and tasks, or interview questions. These are optional, but I strongly encourage that you add them because it shows me evidence of what you actually did. Just as a note, I always get this question: the appendices in this case do not contribute to your page count. So if you have a 4-page script, it doesn't mean that you have to write 1 page. 3 to 4 pages plus any additional appendices. That's it for this lecture. Good luck as you begin conducting your research sessions.